my girlfriend stated. I don't love you anymore, I need a powerful guy. I said, makes sense. Then I took the position she hoped her new, powerful partner would secure at our firm. Emma's words hit me like a clinical diagnosis delivered with surgical precision, which I suppose was fitting since we both worked at Meridian Pharmaceuticals, though in very different capacities. I spent my days in the research lab developing drug formulations while she handled human resources, and after 6 years together, she'd apparently diagnosed our relationship as terminally flawed. Marcus, I need to be honest with you, she said, sitting across from me in our shared apartment, her hands folded like she was conducting an exit interview. I've fallen out of love with you, and I think I know why. I set down my coffee and waited, recognizing the tone she used when delivering bad news to employees. You're brilliant at what you do, don't get me wrong. But you lack executive presence, real ambition. You're content to stay in that lab forever, working on formulations while other people make the big decisions. She paused, watching for my reaction. I need someone with more power, more drive. Someone who thinks bigger than molecular structures and FDA protocols. The irony wasn't lost on me that she was criticizing my dedication to the very science that kept our company profitable, but I stayed quiet. I've been helping Blake prepare for the Chief Operations Officer presentation, she continued, and suddenly everything clicked into place. Blake Morrison, the charismatic regional sales manager who'd transferred to our corporate office 3 months ago, all expensive suits and confident handshakes. He has vision, Marcus. Real leadership potential. The kind of man who could actually run a company someday. I watched her face as she talked about Blake, saw the excitement she used to have when discussing my research breakthroughs, now redirected towards someone else's ambition. I've been feeding him insider information from HR, helping him understand the company structure, giving him strategic advantages for his presentation. I know it's not exactly ethical, but he needed my help to level the playing field. The betrayal was comprehensive, emotional, professional, and moral, all wrapped into one neat package. So this is over, I said, not really a question. Yes, but I hope you understand why. You're a good person, Marcus, but you're not built for leadership. You don't have that killer instinct, that hunger for power. Blake does. She reached across the table and touched my hand, the gesture somehow more insulting than if she'd simply walked away. I need to be with someone who can give me the life I want, the status I deserve. Someone who commands respect in boardrooms, not just laboratory benches. I looked at her, really looked, and saw a stranger who'd been living in my apartment, sharing my bed, while calculating my inadequacies like a cost-benefit analysis. That makes perfect sense, Emma, I said calmly, removing my hand from under hers. Her eyebrows twitched slightly, clearly expecting tears or anger or desperate pleas. You're taking this remarkably well, she said, and I could hear the disappointment in her voice. She wanted drama, wanted me to fight for her, wanted proof that losing her would devastate me. What's the point of fighting reality? You've made your assessment. You think Blake represents power and I don't. You're probably right. The lie came easily because I'd learned something about myself in that moment. I did have that killer instinct she claimed I lacked. I just hadn't been properly motivated to use $1 until she'd handed me the perfect reason on a silver platter. What Emma didn't know was that 3 weeks earlier, I'd been discreetly approached by Dr. Harrison, our board chairman, about something that would have changed everything between us if I'd bothered to mention it. I was reviewing stability data in my lab when he appeared in the doorway, still wearing his surgical mask from a sterile manufacturing inspection. Marcus, do you have a moment for a confidential discussion? We'd walked to his private office, where he'd closed the door and offered me something I'd never expected. The board has been discussing the new Chief Operations Officer position, and your name keeps coming up in our conversations. I'd almost laughed, thinking it was some kind of mistake. Dr. Harrison, I'm a research scientist. I develop formulations, I don't run operations. He'd leaned forward with the intensity that had made him one of the most respected executives in pharmaceutical development. That's exactly why we need you. Blake Morrison gives impressive presentations, but he doesn't understand the science that drives our business. You know every aspect of our drug development pipeline, every regulatory challenge we face, every operational bottleneck that slows down our approvals. The offer had seemed surreal: a 40% salary increase, equity options, complete operational authority over a company worth $800 million. We're facing 3 major FDA submissions this year, plus international market expansion. We need someone who can navigate regulatory requirements while understanding the business implications of every decision. I'd asked for time to consider, mainly because leaving research felt like abandoning my identity. Emma's brutal assessment 3 weeks later eliminated every doubt I'd harbored about accepting corporate responsibility. I called Dr. Harrison the morning after our breakup, catching him before his 7 a.m. hospital rounds. "I'm ready to accept the COO position, but I have one request." There was a pause as he processed my sudden decisiveness. "What do you need, Marcus?" I explained that Blake was scheduled to present his vision for the role next week, and I wanted the announcement delayed until after his presentation. I don't want anyone thinking the decision was made arbitrarily. Let him make his case, then announce that the board had already identified their preferred candidate. Dr. Harrison's chuckle was warm with approval. "That's exactly the kind of strategic thinking we hoped you'd bring to this role. Consider it done." The irony was almost poetic. Emma's betrayal had pushed me toward the very career advancement she'd claimed I lacked courage to pursue, while her insider assistance to Blake had been helping him prepare for a position that was already mine. The company-wide meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. on Thursday, and I arrived 15 minutes early wearing a charcoal suit I'd had tailored specifically for this moment. Blake stood near the front of the conference room, adjusting his tie and reviewing note cards while Emma hovered nearby, whispering last-minute strategic advice with the intensity of a campaign manager on election night. I took a seat in the back row, watching Blake command attention with his practiced confidence as employees filed in, many already congratulating him on what they assumed was his inevitable promotion. "Good morning, everyone," Dr. Harrison began, gesturing toward Blake with theatrical formality. "As you know, we're here to learn about Blake Morrison's vision for Meridian's operational future." Blake launched into his presentation with polished enthusiasm, discussing market penetration strategies and operational synergies while clicking through slides that clearly bore Emma's fingerprints in their detailed knowledge of internal personnel structures and budget allocations. "We need to leverage our existing assets more aggressively," Blake declared, using buzzwords that sounded impressive but revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of pharmaceutical development timelines. "I propose accelerating our FDA submissions by 30% through streamlined protocols and enhanced stakeholder engagement." I almost winced at his casual dismissal of regulatory requirements that had taken me years to master, but I kept my expression neutral while Emma beamed with pride at his confident delivery. The applause was enthusiastic when Blake concluded, and several colleagues approached him with congratulations and networking opportunities, treating him like the anointed successor he believed himself to be. Dr. Harrison returned to the podium as the crowd settled, his expression unreadable. "Thank you, Blake, for that comprehensive presentation. However, I have an announcement that may surprise some of you." The room grew quiet, sensing unexpected drama. After extensive deliberation, the board has selected Dr. Marcus Chen as our new Chief Operations Officer, effective immediately. I watched Emma's face drain of color as the words registered, her confident smile crumbling into shocked disbelief while Blake's expression shifted from triumph to confusion to dawning horror. "Marcus has demonstrated exceptional leadership in managing our most critical drug development programs, and his scientific expertise makes him uniquely qualified to guide Meridian through our upcoming regulatory challenges." I stood and walked to the front of the room, my footsteps echoing in the stunned silence, feeling Emma's eyes tracking my movement like she was witnessing something impossible. "Thank you, Dr. Harrison, and thank you all for your confidence in my abilities," I said, my voice steady despite the surreal nature of addressing colleagues who'd known me only as the quiet research scientist. "I look forward to working with each of you as we expand Meridian's impact in pharmaceutical development." Blake stood frozen beside the podium, his note card still clutched in his hand, while Emma pressed her palm against her mouth as the full implications of what had just happened began to sink in. I spent my first week as COO methodically reviewing every operational proposal that had crossed my desk in recent months, and Blake's strategic recommendations quickly revealed themselves as fundamentally flawed in ways that would have cost Meridian millions in regulatory delays and potential lawsuits. During my first executive meeting, I spread Blake's marketing projections across the conference table like evidence in a criminal investigation. These timelines assume we can accelerate Phase 3 trials by 6 months, I explained to the assembled department heads, pointing to specific projections that Emma had clearly helped him research. Unfortunately, that would violate FDA protocols for our cardiovascular drug trials and could result in our application being rejected entirely. Blake, who'd been invited to present his proposals in detail, shifted uncomfortably as I continued dismantling his strategy with clinical precision. Additionally, this proposed marketing campaign for our diabetes medication would constitute off-label promotion before we receive final approval, which could trigger federal investigation and substantial fines. I watched Emma take notes frantically from her position at the side table, her role as HR liaison requiring her to document my systematic destruction of the man she'd chosen over me. Blake, I'm going to assign you to our regulatory compliance training program, I announced with professional courtesy that barely masked the demotion. You'll be working with our junior staff to understand pharmaceutical development requirements before taking on strategic planning responsibilities. The meeting continued with discussions of actual operational challenges, supply chain management, international regulatory harmonization, clinical trial coordination, topics that required deep scientific knowledge Blake had never bothered to acquire. Emma found herself excluded from high-level planning discussions as I restructured reporting protocols to streamline decision-making, effectively bypassing her department's traditional influence over strategic initiatives. Dr. Chen, she approached me after the meeting, her voice carefully controlled. I wanted to congratulate you on your promotion. I hope there won't be any personal conflicts affecting our professional relationship. I looked at her with the same neutral expression I used when reviewing clinical data. Emma, I treat all employees with equal professionalism. Your performance will be evaluated based entirely on your contributions to company objectives. The dismissive politeness was more devastating than anger would have been, reducing our 6-year relationship to a minor footnote in corporate hierarchy. Within days, Blake's reputation as a strategic visionary evaporated as other employees recognized the depth of his inexperience, while Emma discovered that her insider knowledge meant nothing when the actual decision-maker had never needed her information in the first place. Blake's desperation became obvious within 2 weeks as he began spreading rumors about nepotism and claiming my promotion was based on personal connections rather than merit, apparently forgetting that his own girlfriend had been feeding him confidential information throughout his failed campaign. I heard Marcus only got the job because he's been here longer, he told anyone who would listen during lunch breaks, his voice carrying the bitter edge of someone watching their career crumble in real time. Emma, equally panicked about her own position, started documenting what she claimed were my retaliatory management decisions, building a case for hostile work environment while conveniently ignoring her own ethical violations. Their collaborative desperation reached its peak when Blake made the catastrophic decision to tamper with clinical trial data from a cardiovascular study I'd supervised 2 years earlier, apparently hoping to expose flaws in my previous work that would justify questioning my competence. I discovered his sabotage attempt immediately because I knew every data point in those trials by memory, having spent 18 months analyzing patient responses and adverse events with obsessive attention to detail that had driven Emma crazy during our relationship. These statistical correlations don't match the original dataset, I noted while reviewing quarterly reports, recognizing altered confidence intervals that Blake had modified to suggest methodological problems. The security footage was damning, Blake accessing my former laboratory database at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, downloading files he had no authorization to review, then uploading modified versions that would have invalidated critical safety data if anyone had been foolish enough to trust his alterations. You realize this constitutes federal crime, not just corporate misconduct, I explained to Dr. Harrison when presenting my evidence, spreading printouts across his desk like a forensic investigator. Falsifying clinical trial data violates FDA regulations and could result in criminal prosecution. Emma's role in providing Blake with system access codes became apparent during the investigation, her desperation to help him succeed having pushed her into territory that threatened not just her career but her freedom. Their plan to undermine my credibility had spectacularly backfired, transforming them from corporate rivals into potential federal defendants while other employees rallied behind the leadership they finally recognized they'd needed all along. I handled Blake's sabotage attempt with the same methodical precision I'd used to develop successful drug formulations, presenting irrefutable evidence to the board and legal department without revealing any personal motivation behind my thoroughness. The documentation was comprehensive, time-stamped security footage, digital forensics showing file modifications, expert analysis confirming data manipulation, all compiled into a report that made Blake's termination inevitable and legally bulletproof. This is career-ending misconduct in our industry, I explained to the emergency board meeting, spreading evidence across the conference table like a prosecutor presenting a murder case. Data integrity violations make him unemployable at any legitimate pharmaceutical company. Blake's termination was announced that afternoon, security escorting him from the building while his personal belongings were packed and shipped to avoid any additional security risks or potential confrontations with colleagues who trusted his expertise. Emma faced her own reckoning when the investigation revealed her systematic violations of confidentiality policies, her provision of system access codes, and her role in facilitating what could have become a federal crime if Blake's tampering had gone undetected. We could pursue criminal charges, our legal counsel advised during a closed-door meeting, but accepting Ms. Patterson's resignation and cooperation might serve the company's interests better than prolonged litigation. I recommended clemency, not from lingering affection but because destroying Emma completely would have been excessive punishment for someone whose real crime had been poor judgment rather than criminal intent. She accepted demotion to a clerical position in our document archive department, losing her benefits package, career advancement opportunities, and any remaining influence over corporate decisions that had once made her feel powerful. "Thank you for not pressing charges," she said during our final professional interaction, her voice barely above a whisper as she cleaned out her executive office. "I made terrible decisions, and I know I don't deserve your mercy." I looked at her with the detached sympathy I'd feel for any former colleague facing career consequences for ethical lapses. "Everyone makes mistakes, Emma. The important thing is learning from them." The board commended my handling of what could have become a major corporate scandal, praising my discretion and professionalism in navigating a situation that involved people I'd known personally, though they never learned the full extent of those personal connections. 6 months later, I was reviewing expansion proposals in my corner office when Dr. Harrison knocked and entered with the kind of satisfied expression that usually preceded good news about quarterly earnings or regulatory approvals. "Marcus, I wanted to personally thank you for transforming our operations beyond anything we'd hoped for when we offered you this position. The numbers were undeniably impressive. We'd successfully navigated 2 major FDA approvals that had been stalled for months under previous leadership, expanded into 3 international markets that generated $47 million in new revenue, and streamlined our clinical trial processes to reduce development timelines by an average of 18%. Your leadership style has been exactly what this company needed," he continued, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Quiet competence, strategic thinking, and the kind of scientific expertise that actually drives profitable decisions rather than just impressive presentations." Through the pharmaceutical industry grapevine, I'd learned that Blake had left drug development entirely, reportedly working at a small insurance firm in Kansas where his presentation skills might actually serve a useful purpose without endangering public health through regulatory incompetence. Emma had eventually resigned from her archive position and moved back to her hometown in Ohio, where she was apparently working for a local medical clinic and keeping a much lower profile than the ambitious corporate climber I'd once known. I found myself reflecting on her brutal assessment of my character during our breakup, realizing that she'd been partially correct about my lack of ambition. I had been content to remain in the background, focusing on scientific problems rather than corporate advancement. But her betrayal had revealed capabilities I'd never known I possessed, forcing me to discover that real power comes not from charismatic presentations or political manipulation, but from competence, integrity, and the quiet confidence that comes from solving problems other people cannot. The transformation had been remarkable, from a research scientist who avoided corporate politics to a COO who commanded respect throughout the organization, not through intimidation or flashy gestures, but through consistent demonstration of expertise and strategic thinking. We're considering additional expansion into European markets, Dr. Harrison mentioned, spreading preliminary market analysis across my desk. The board would like your assessment of regulatory challenges and operational requirements for establishing manufacturing facilities in Germany and Switzerland. I reviewed the documentation with the same methodical attention to detail that had made me successful in drug development, recognizing opportunities and challenges that would have been invisible to someone like Blake who prioritized style over substance. Emma had claimed I wasn't marriage material because I lacked executive presence and ambition, but sitting in that corner office, planning international expansion for a company worth over $1 billion, I finally understood that I had always been the powerful guy she claimed to need. She just couldn't recognize real strength when it was standing right in front of her, preferring the illusion of power over its actual substance.